In the heart of a small African village, where traditions run deep and the supernatural often whispers in the winds, a horrifying tale is passed from one generation to the next. A woman, once full of life and hope, faces a fate more terrifying than death itself. In a time when the spirit world mingles closely with the living, she gives birth to something not meant to be born, the coffin. This chilling African folktale explores the boundary between life and death, revealing a secret that will haunt the village forever. What happens when a mother's love meets an unimaginable curse? You won't believe the horrifying truth behind the woman who gave birth to a coffin. In the heart of the African savanna, nestled within a small, isolated village, lived a woman named Adama. Known for her kind heart and quiet grace, she was a woman of deep spiritual roots. The village, though small and humble, was a place where traditions ran deep and the supernatural was never far from the surface. Stories of the old gods, spirits, and ancestral wisdom were passed down from one generation to the next, shaping the beliefs of the people who lived there. Yet, even in a village so rich in culture and heritage, the line between the living and the dead was thin, and not every story had a happy ending. Adama's life had always been a peaceful one. She had married a kind man named Coffin, and together, they had built a modest home near the edge of the village. Their love for each other was simple yet profound, and they shared the same desire, to have a child of their own. Though they had been married for several years, their dream remained unfulfilled. Adama would often find herself dreaming of the day when she would hold a child in her arms, a baby who would carry their legacy into the future. Years passed, and Adama's hope began to fade. Her longing for a child grew more intense, and the once quiet whispers of concern from the elders grew louder. The village believed that for a woman to be truly blessed, she must have children to carry on the family name. Without a child, Adama's place in the community felt uncertain. Coffin, ever the supportive husband, would console her, reassuring her that their love for each other was enough. Still, Adama couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that lingered within her. One day, while she was walking to the village well, she met an old woman known to the villagers as Baba Yara. Baba Yara was a healer, a wise woman who had lived in the village for as long as anyone could remember. Her knowledge of herbs, spirits, and the ways of the world was unmatched, and the villagers often turned to her for advice when matters of the heart or spirit needed guidance. As Adama approached, Baba Yara smiled knowingly, as though she had been expecting her. "Adama," Baba Yara said, her voice raspy with age, "I see the weight of your heart. You long for a child, do you not?" Adama nodded, surprised that the old woman could read her so easily. "Yes, Baba Yara," she said softly. "I dream of the day when my arms will be filled with the love of a child, but it seems that day will never come." Baba Yara's eyes twinkled as she placed a hand on Adama's shoulder. "There is a way, child," she said with a knowing smile. "A way for you to bring a child into this world. But it comes at a great cost." Adama's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, Baba Yara? What cost?" The old woman's eyes grew darker as she spoke. "There are ancient rituals, long forgotten by most, that can summon the spirits of life and death. A child can be born from such rituals, but it is not a child of the flesh. It is a child born of the spirit, a child who will carry the essence of life and death within them." Adama listened intently, her mind racing with thoughts of what Baba Yara was offering. Could it be true? Could such a ritual really grant her the child she had always dreamed of? "I am not asking you to decide now," Baba Yara continued, "but know that if you choose this path, you must be ready for what comes next. The child born from such a ritual will be unlike any other. They will carry within them the secrets of life and death, and the bond between mother and child will be unlike anything you have ever known." Adama stood in silence, contemplating the offer. The weight of the decision was overwhelming. On one hand, she longed for a child so deeply that she would do anything to have one. But on the other hand, The price of such a gift seemed steep. Was she willing to risk everything for the chance to be a mother? What must I do? Adama asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. Baba Yara's smile widened, and she leaned in closer to Adama. The ritual must be performed on the night of the full moon. You must gather the ingredients, a rare herb, a sacred stone, and a piece of cloth from the dead. Only then will the ritual be complete. Adama's heart pounded in her chest. She had never heard of such a thing before, but there was something about Baba Yara's presence, her calm assurance, that made her believe in the possibility of the impossible. Without thinking further, she agreed to the ritual. That night, as the full moon rose high in the sky, Adama gathered the necessary items and made her way to the clearing at the edge of the forest, where Baba Yara awaited her. The air was thick with the scent of earth and magic, and as she stood there in the moonlight, she felt a strange energy coursing through her veins. Baba Yara led her through the steps of the ritual, chanting incantations that Adama couldn't understand. The wind howled as though in response, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. With each passing moment, Adama felt the presence of something beyond the physical world, something ancient and powerful. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ritual was complete. Baba Yara smiled knowingly and handed Adama a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Your child," Baba Yara said, her voice heavy with the weight of the moment. Adama's heart raced as she unwrapped the cloth. But what she found was not what she had expected. Instead of a newborn baby, she found a small, intricately carved wooden coffin. The sight of it caused her to gasp in horror. This was not what she had imagined. This was not the child she had prayed for. As she stared at the coffin, the realization hit her: this was no ordinary child. This was not a gift, it was a curse. As the moon slowly sank below the horizon, Adama stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The realization of what she had just witnessed was slow to sink in, and the world around her seemed to blur in disbelief. She held the small wooden coffin in her trembling hands, and for a moment, the world was utterly silent. No longer was she in the village she had known all her life, surrounded by the love of her community and the warmth of her home. Instead, she felt as though she was standing at the edge of something far darker, something that had no return. Baba Yara stood silently beside her, the wise woman's gaze unreadable as the wind whispered through the trees. The stillness of the night was suffocating, and Adama's mind raced, struggling to understand the horror that had just unfolded before her eyes. "What is this?" Adama finally managed to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. The words tasted foreign on her tongue, and yet, they were the only ones her mind could form. She glanced up at Baba Yara, hoping for some explanation, something that would make sense of this terrifying moment. Baba Yara did not speak immediately. Instead, she placed a hand on Adama's shoulder, her touch surprisingly warm for someone so ancient. "The child you have prayed for," she said slowly, her voice thick with something Adama couldn't quite place, "is not of the flesh. The ritual you invoked has brought forth a spirit, not a child. And the spirit you have summoned is not the one you expected." Adama's breath hitched. "But, this is a coffin. A child should not come in the form of a coffin." She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, but she dared not let them fall. She was paralyzed by the weight of her own choices, unsure of how to process the truth that had just been revealed to her. Baba Yara nodded solemnly. "The coffin is the vessel. What you hold is the soul of a child who has been sent to you not to live, but to deliver a message. This is no ordinary child. It carries with it the history and the power of the spirits." Adama's mind reeled. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What kind of curse have I unleashed upon myself and my family?" The old woman sighed, her eyes clouded with centuries of knowledge. "The spirits have spoken, Adama. They have given you the child, but the price you will pay is steep. This coffin represents death, not life. It is a symbol of the balance between the two. The spirits are bound by the curse of an ancient wrong, and you, my dear, have become the vessel through which the curse is fulfilled. Adama stumbled backward, her knees weak. The weight of Baba Yora's words crashed down upon her like a tidal wave. She had longed for a child, her whole life had been devoted to the idea of motherhood. She had prayed for a child to call her own, a child to nurture, to love, and to raise. But instead, she had been given a coffin, a symbol of the very thing she had feared most, the end of life. Tears began to slip down her cheeks as the full horror of the situation overwhelmed her. How could I have been so foolish, she whispered to herself. Why did I listen to you, Baba Yora? The old woman's expression softened, and she placed a hand on Adama's arm. The spirits choose those who will carry their burdens. You were chosen because of your deep connection to the land, because of the love you carry in your heart for the child you have longed for. But the spirits also require a sacrifice, a price that must be paid. This child, this coffin, is the manifestation of that price. You must understand, Adama, that the forces at work here are ancient and far beyond your control. For a moment, the two women stood in silence, the weight of Baba Yora's words hanging in the air. Adama's mind raced with questions, but none of them seemed to make sense. She had thought she was bringing life into the world. She had believed she was fulfilling her destiny as a mother. But now, standing before the coffin, she realized that her destiny had been altered forever. What am I to do with this? Adama asked, her voice cracking with emotion as she held the coffin to her chest. I can't raise a child like this. This isn't a child. This is a curse. Baba Yora looked at her with an expression that mixed both sorrow and understanding. You must decide, Adama. The path before you is not easy. The spirit within the coffin is not meant to live, but to teach. It will show you things, warn you of dangers, and lead you toward a greater understanding of the forces that govern life and death. But be warned, this child will not stay with you forever. The spirit inside it will one day call you to a reckoning. Adama's heart felt as though it had been torn in two. The visions of motherhood, of holding a living, breathing child in her arms, now seemed like a distant dream. The truth that had been laid before her was too much to bear. She had wanted a child, but what she had received was something much darker, something beyond her comprehension. I can't bear this, Adama whispered, clutching the coffin even tighter to her chest. What have I done? You must find a way to honor the spirit, Adama, Baba Yora said, her voice gentle but firm. The curse cannot be undone, but the path you take from here will determine whether you live in peace with it or allow it to destroy you. Adama nodded numbly, the weight of the situation slowly sinking in. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew that her life would never be the same. The spirit inside the coffin was not something she could ignore. It was a part of her now, and she had to find a way to make peace with it. With Baba Yora's cryptic words lingering in her mind, Adama turned to leave the forest clearing, the coffin still clutched tightly in her hands. She knew she had to find a way to live with the curse that had been bestowed upon her. But she also knew that there was no turning back. The journey ahead would be one of great hardship, and the answers she sought were far beyond what she could have ever imagined. As the moon continued its slow arc across the sky, Adama walked back toward the village, her mind filled with questions and her heart filled with fear. The secret she now carried was far more dangerous than she could have ever realized, and she could only wonder what the future held for her and the child, if you could call it that had been born from the darkness. As the days passed after her meeting with the old woman, Adama couldn't shake the weight of the decision she had made. The path ahead felt uncertain, and the urgency of what was required kept her awake at night. The ancient ritual that had been promised to her wasn't just an ordinary ceremony, it was one that dealt with the very fabric of life and death. The child she had longed for so desperately was within her reach, but the price, she feared, might be more than she could bear. Adama spent the following days gathering the items necessary for the ritual. Each of them was as important as the next, no one ingredient could be left behind. She found the rare herb deep within the forest, its petals glowing faintly in the moonlight, its fragrance intoxicating. The sacred stone she needed was buried near the riverbank, a place that had been untouched by the villagers for generations. Finally, the piece of cloth from the dead was perhaps the most unsettling task of all. Adama went to the edge of the village graveyard, where ancient spirits were said to rest. The cloth was not one that could simply be purchased or taken from a store, it had to be the cloth of someone who had passed recently, someone whose spirit was still lingering. The day before the full moon, Adama stood at the entrance to the graveyard, holding the fabric she had taken from a recently departed elder. The weight of it in her hands was like a heavy chain, and her heart felt heavy with every step. She had never visited the graveyard before, and as she walked through the rows of stones marking the resting places of ancestors, a chill ran down her spine. She could feel the presence of the spirits in the air, their whispers a distant hum that seemed to grow louder as she moved deeper into the sacred ground. Each step she took felt like a violation, as though she were trespassing on hallowed ground. The closer she got to the burial site of the elder, the stronger the energy became. It was almost as though the earth itself was alive, watching her, sensing her purpose. But Adama pressed forward. She had already come this far. There was no turning back now. With trembling hands, she wrapped the cloth carefully and placed it into the woven basket, along with the herb and the stone. She could hear the faintest whisper of wind as she stood over the elder's grave, but it was enough to send a shiver of fear through her. What she was about to do could change the course of her life forever. There was no guarantee that the ritual would work, or that it would come without consequences. She had been warned. The old woman's words echoed in her mind, "The child you bring forth will not be like any other." The night of the full moon arrived. The village was quieter than usual, as the villagers had retreated to their homes, unaware of the ritual taking place just outside their borders. Only Adama and the old woman, Baba Yora, knew the true purpose of the night. They met at the edge of the village near a sacred grove, a place where the spirits were said to roam freely. The air was thick with magic, and the moon hung heavy in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the land. Adama stood before Baba Yora, her heart racing. The ingredients were laid out before her on the ground, the herbs, the stone, and the cloth from the dead. Baba Yora's hands moved with practiced ease, arranging the items in a specific pattern. The old woman's eyes were closed, and her lips moved in a low, rhythmic chant. The air around them began to shift, the wind picking up speed, carrying with it the scent of earth and fire. Adama could feel the ground beneath her feet vibrate with energy as the ritual began. Baba Yora motioned for Adama to sit cross-legged in the center of the circle they had formed. She complied, her hands still clutching the cloth tightly. The old woman's chant grew louder, and with every word, the air around them seemed to hum with power. It was as if the earth itself was coming alive, and Adama could feel the energy coursing through her body. She was no longer just a woman, she was part of something far greater, something ancient and powerful. The boundary between the living and the dead was thinning, and in that moment, Adama felt both a deep connection to the earth and an unsettling distance from the world she had once known. The wind began to howl, and the light from the full moon grew brighter, casting long shadows across the ground. Baba Yora's chant reached its peak, and a moment of intense silence filled the air. Adama could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for what would happen next. The night seemed to stretch on forever, as if time itself had stopped. Suddenly, the air shifted. A strange sensation washed over Adama, as though something was stirring within her. The cloth she held began to twitch, and before her eyes, it began to shift and change. Adama gasped as the fabric seemed to breathe, its edges curling like living tendrils. Slowly, it began to take shape, forming the outline of a small figure, no larger than a newborn child. But as the form emerged from the cloth, Adama's heart sank. Instead of the child she had hoped for, a small, intricately carved wooden coffin appeared before her. It was unmistakable, a coffin, not a living, breathing child. The eerie silence that followed was broken only by the soft rustle of the wind. Adama's breath caught in her throat as she gazed down at the wooden vessel that now lay before her. The coffin was adorned with symbols, ancient and foreboding, and a chill ran through her body. She had expected a miracle, but this was no miracle, it was something much darker. Baba Yara stood silently beside her, watching the transformation with an unreadable expression. "The ritual is complete," she said softly, her voice heavy with meaning. "You have been given what you asked for, but be warned. The spirit of this child carries with it the curse of the past. It is not a child you can love in the traditional way. You must decide what to do next." Adama stared at the coffin, her heart racing. She had called forth life, but what she had received was not what she had imagined. What had she done? Had she opened a door that should have remained closed? The winds howled around her, and in the distance, the faint sound of drums echoed through the night. It was the beginning of something far darker than she had ever anticipated. The journey she had embarked upon had only just begun, and she could not escape the consequences of the ritual she had set in motion. Adama stood motionless, staring at the small, intricately carved coffin that had materialized before her. The weight of the moment settled over her like an oppressive storm cloud. What she had envisioned as a joyous arrival of a long-awaited child had instead become a nightmare, one that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The realization of what she had done began to creep into her mind. She had summoned something from the spirit world, but it was not a child. It was something darker, something that would come to define her existence in ways she could never have predicted. The coffin lay before her, its polished wood gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The carvings on the surface of the coffin depicted strange symbols, ancient and cryptic. Adama's hands trembled as she reached out to touch it, her fingers brushing the cool wood. She had hoped, prayed, and sacrificed for a child, yet this coffin felt like the embodiment of everything she had feared, the unknown, the uncontrollable, and the curse of the spirits. Baba Yara, the old woman who had guided her through this ritual, stood silently beside her, her eyes betraying no emotion. She had not flinched or shown any sign of surprise when the coffin had emerged instead of a child. It was as if she had known all along what would happen. "The ritual has been completed," Baba Yara said softly, her voice thick with meaning. "You have what you asked for, but what you didn't understand was that the spirits only grant what they choose to. This is not a gift. This is a consequence of the past, one that will unfold in ways you cannot yet comprehend." Adama felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The air around them felt thick, charged with an energy she couldn't quite understand. She had crossed a line, invoked forces that were beyond her control. The peaceful village, the life she had known, all seemed to be slipping through her fingers like sand. "I never wanted this," Adama whispered, her voice cracking. "I wanted a child, a living, breathing child. But this is not a child. This is not what I asked for." Her words felt like a plea, but there was no one to hear her. The world around her felt distant, disconnected. The ritual had brought her to this point, but what would happen next? What could she possibly do with a coffin that contained no life, no hope? Baba Yara's gaze softened, and she placed a hand gently on Adama's shoulder. "You must understand, child, that the spirits cannot be bargained with. They are ancient forces, not bound by human understanding. You cannot simply ask for something and expect to receive it on your terms. This coffin is not a curse, but a reflection of your deepest desires. The spirit within it is tied to your own heart, your own wish to become a mother. But the price is steep." Adama felt her chest tighten as she tried to make sense of the situation. She had been willing to sacrifice everything for the chance to become a mother, but she had never expected this. A part of her longed to scream, to run away, to undo the ritual, but she knew deep down that there was no turning back now. The spirits had answered her call, but their answer had come in a form she never could have anticipated. As she stared at the coffin, a sense of dread began to settle in. She had always believed in the power of life and death, the balance between the two, but she had never fully understood the weight of that belief. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The spirits had granted her wish, but what would they take in return? What should I do now? Adama asked, her voice small and vulnerable. I cannot keep this coffin. I cannot live with it. Her hands clutched the coffin tightly, her knuckles turning white. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for a curse. Baba Yara sighed deeply, her eyes filled with sorrow. The child is not the curse, Adama. The curse is the misunderstanding of what you truly sought. You wanted a child, yes, but you also wanted to bypass the natural order. You wanted to break the boundaries that the spirits have set. And now, you must live with the consequences of that desire. Tears welled in Adama's eyes as she looked at the small wooden coffin. It had once symbolized her hope, her dream of motherhood, but now it felt like a reminder of her failure. She had been too desperate, too eager to fill the void in her heart, and now she was paying the price. Baba Yara's voice broke through her thoughts. You must understand, child, that this is not the end. You can still make amends, but it will not be easy. The spirit within the coffin will not rest until it has fulfilled its purpose. It is tied to your heart, Adama. You must decide how to handle this gift, or curse, depending on how you choose to see it. Adama's thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and fear. How could she face the villagers with this? How could she explain what had happened? How could she possibly raise a child, or something like a child, when she had no idea what it really was? She turned to Baba Yara, her eyes pleading. What do I do? How can I make this right? Baba Yara's face was grave. The spirits will guide you, child. The path ahead will not be easy, but the answer lies within you. You must confront the forces you have invoked and find the strength to live with the choices you have made. If you truly wish to be a mother, then you must learn to accept what has been given to you, no matter how difficult it may be. With those words, Baba Yara began to slowly fade into the shadows, her presence disappearing into the night. Adama stood alone in the clearing, the coffin still in her hands. The moonlight illuminated the wood, casting eerie shadows over the scene. The spirits had answered her call, but they had given her something far more complex than she had ever imagined. In that moment, Adama realized that she had embarked on a journey that was far from over. The road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, but she knew she had to face it head-on. The gift, or curse, of the coffin was now hers to bear, and only she could decide how it would shape her future. As the night grew colder and the wind began to pick up, Adama took a deep breath and walked back toward the village. The coffin in her arms felt heavier with every step, but she knew she had no choice but to move forward. The spirits had spoken. Now, she would have to find a way to live with their answer.